Ms. Bennett, where is your attorney? Judge Nathan Callahan's voice crossed courtroom 4C with enough weight to silence the last whisper in the gallery. Laura Bennett stood alone at the respondent's table, 46 years old, dressed in a plain charcoal jacket and dark slacks, with a faded navy folder resting beneath one hand. The chair beside her was empty. Across the aisle, Assistant County Attorney Ethan Brooks had 3 thick case files, a leather briefcase, and the comfortable posture of a man who expected the morning to go exactly as planned. Laura raised her eyes toward the bench. "I do not have one, Your Honor." A fluorescent light hummed overhead. Someone shifted on an old wooden bench behind her. Callahan glanced at the empty chair, then at the file before him. "You are appearing in a county civil enforcement matter without legal representation. Do you understand that?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And you intend to proceed today?" Laura paused. "I intend to answer what I can." Brooks rose before Callahan could respond. "The county is prepared to proceed, Your Honor. Ms. Bennett has had sufficient notice of this hearing." Laura did not turn toward him. Callahan did. "I will determine whether we proceed, Mr. Brooks." Brooks gave a restrained nod and sat down. Laura remained standing. Callahan studied her for a moment longer than necessary. Most unrepresented people who entered his courtroom carried their anxiety openly. They shuffled papers, filled silence with explanations, or searched the gallery for reassurance. Laura did none of those things. Her folder was positioned square with the edge of the table. A pen lay beside it, parallel to the wood grain. Her shoulders were relaxed, but her posture was exact. Nothing about her asked for sympathy. "When did you first attempt to obtain counsel?" Callahan asked. "The morning after I received notice of the hearing." "How many offices did you contact?" 4. Brooks opened a folder. "The county's records reflect 2. Laura finally looked toward him. "Then the county's records are incomplete." There was no challenge in her voice. No sarcasm. She said it the way someone might correct a time on a clock. Brooks frowned. "Do you have documentation?" "Yes." Laura touched the navy folder, but did not open it until Callahan nodded. Inside were neatly separated documents, each marked by date. She removed 4 pages and placed them on the table. 2 offices declined because of scheduling conflicts. 1 required a retainer I could not afford. The 4th referred me to legal assistance. "My appointment is next Thursday." Callahan's pen slowed. Brooks leaned back slightly. "That does not change the county's position." "I did not say it did," Laura replied. Callahan stopped writing. Something in the cadence of those 6 words caught him unexpectedly. Calm. Precise. Almost familiar. He looked up. Laura was already facing the bench again. For the briefest instant, Callahan felt the strange sensation of standing in a place he had never seen and somehow remembering it. He dismissed the thought. "Ms. Bennett, what exactly are you asking this court to do today?" Laura rested both hands beside the folder. "Read the record before deciding what it means, Your Honor." Callahan's pen remained motionless. The sentence was ordinary. The voice was not. Somewhere beyond conscious memory, something old shifted. A hard white sky. The distant pulse of machinery. A woman's voice speaking through heat and noise. Then it was gone. Callahan stared at Laura Bennett, unable to explain why a woman he was certain he had never met had just made him remember being young. Callahan held Laura's gaze for another second, then looked down at the 4 pages she had provided. The feeling passed, but not completely. It remained at the edge of his attention while court clerk Rachel Morgan crossed the 12 feet from her desk to collect the documents. Laura thanked her with a quiet nod. Rachel noticed the faded corners of the navy folder, the careful tabs inside, and a small velvet pouch tucked beneath a stack of receipts. Nothing about it looked expensive. Everything about it looked organized. "These will be marked for the record," Rachel said. "Thank you," Laura replied. Ethan Brooks opened his largest case file. "Your Honor, none of this changes the underlying violation. The county issued proper notice, conducted the required inspection, and provided Ms. Bennett sufficient time to comply." Laura listened without interrupting. She did not reach for her papers. She did not shake her head. When Brooks finished, She opened the folder to a yellow tab and removed one sheet. "May I respond, Your Honor?" Callahan nodded. Briefly, the county's first notice is dated April 15th. The supplemental inspection report is dated April 18th. The contractor completed the work on April 16th. Brooks frowned. "That is your interpretation. Those are the dates." Laura placed the contractor receipt beside the inspection report. Brooks looked toward Callahan. "The county disputes whether the work satisfied the original notice." "Then that is the issue," Laura said. "Not whether the work happened." Brooks tightened his jaw. "Ms. Bennett, I am capable of explaining the county's position." Laura met his eyes. "I assumed you were." Rachel lowered her gaze to hide the smallest reaction. Callahan did not smile, but his attention sharpened. Laura had not raised her voice once. She was not trying to dominate the room. She was simply refusing to let imprecise language pass as fact. The rear courtroom door opened with a soft click. Before the bailiff turned his head, Laura's eyes moved toward the sound. A middle-aged man stepped inside, glanced at the case number displayed near the entrance, realized his mistake, and quietly left. Laura's attention returned to Callahan immediately. The movement lasted less than 2 seconds. Callahan noticed it anyway. He noticed something else too. Laura always knew where her documents were before she touched the folder. She never searched. When Brooks spoke, she listened completely. When Callahan asked a question, she answered only that question. No excuses. No unnecessary history. No attempt to make herself more sympathetic. "Ms. Bennett," Callahan said, "what outcome are you requesting today?" "Time to attend my legal assistance appointment next Thursday and a complete review of the inspection timeline." Brooks exhaled. "Your Honor, this matter has already been delayed." Laura turned toward him. "Once. That is still a delay." "It was requested because the county sent part of the file to the wrong mailing address." Brooks flipped through his papers. "That was corrected. After 11 days. The courtroom went still again. Callahan looked at the county file, then at Laura's documents. Her answers were beginning to create a pattern. Not the pattern Brooks expected. She was not confused by procedure. She was tracking it. "What did you do before retirement, Ms. Bennett?" Callahan asked. Laura hesitated for the first time. "I served in the United States Army." Brooks glanced up. Rachel did too. Callahan felt that strange pressure return behind his ribs. Army. The word should have meant nothing. Instead, it seemed to unlock the faintest sound in his memory, like radio static beneath a distant engine. Laura closed the folder carefully. "For how long?" Callahan asked. Her expression became guarded. "Long enough to learn that details matter, Your Honor." Callahan's pen stopped again. This time, he did not dismiss the feeling. Ethan Brooks was the first to break the silence. "With respect, Your Honor, military experience does not change the standard before this court." Laura turned her head toward him, her expression unreadable. "I did not say it did." Brooks closed one folder and placed both hands on the table. "Then perhaps we can return to the relevant facts. Ms. Bennett has repeatedly challenged county findings, questioned inspection procedures, and submitted objections as though this were some kind of command review." A faint tension entered the room. Rachel Morgan stopped typing. Judge Callahan watched Laura carefully. She did not react to the tone. "I submitted objections because the dates conflict," she said. Brooks gave a thin smile. "You seem very confident for someone appearing without counsel." Laura's fingers rested against the edge of her folder. "Confidence has nothing to do with whether a date is correct." Brooks stepped into the aisle. "And your years in the Army do not make you an expert on county procedure." "I never claimed they did." "Your rank does not matter here." Laura looked at him fully now. "I have not told you my rank." The answer landed cleanly. Brooks paused. Several people in the gallery shifted on the wooden benches. Callahan felt the strange familiarity tighten around him again. Laura had not become defensive. If anything, the pressure seemed to make her quieter. Brooks glanced toward the bench, then continued. "The point is that civilian courts operate differently. You cannot organize a folder, identify a few dates, and expect the process to stop because you disagree with the county. Laura waited until he finished. I am not asking the process to stop. Then what are you asking? For the process to use the correct facts. Brooks exhaled through his nose. According to you. Laura opened the Navy folder and removed 2 documents. According to the county's own records. She held up the first. The notice says the property remained out of compliance through April 18th. She raised the second. The contractor receipt shows completion on April 16th. The supplemental inspection report contains a handwritten notation confirming the correction before the county says it remained unresolved. Brooks reached for his copy. Paper moved sharply beneath his fingers. That notation has not been authenticated. Then authenticate it. Rachel looked up. Callahan leaned slightly forward. Laura's voice had not risen, yet the balance in the room had shifted. Brooks found the page and studied it. Ms. Bennett, you are not in a position to instruct the county how to conduct its case. Laura's face remained calm. Then do not ask me to accept a record you have not verified. Brooks straightened. This is not the Army. Nobody here is required to follow your orders. Something flickered behind Laura's eyes, there and gone. Callahan saw it. Mr. Brooks, he warned. But Laura answered first. My service is not evidence in this case. Callahan froze. The words were simple, but their cadence struck something buried deep inside him. For 1 second, courtroom 4C seemed to lose its edges. He saw white sunlight reflected from pale ground. He heard the low mechanical pulse of engines somewhere beyond sight. A radio hissed with broken static. Then a woman's voice, controlled and unmistakably calm, surfaced from a place in his memory he had not visited in years. Focus on what we know. Nothing else matters yet. The image disappeared. Callahan blinked and found Laura watching him. Brooks was still speaking, but his words seemed distant. Callahan looked at the woman standing alone below his bench. Her face meant nothing to him. Her voice did. Her stillness did. The way she separated fact from emotion did. He lowered his eyes toward the name printed across the case file. Laura Bennett. He read it once, then again, while an old memory moved behind a door he had believed was permanently closed. Judge Nathan Callahan kept his eyes on the case file until the letters of Laura Bennett's name stopped feeling like ordinary ink. He could not explain the recognition, and 23 years was too long to trust a fragment of memory without proof. Let us return to the documents, he said. Laura opened the faded Navy folder. The supplemental report is behind the contractor receipt, Your Honor. She reached beneath a row of carefully arranged papers, but the corner of an envelope caught against the small velvet pouch Rachel had noticed earlier. Laura adjusted it. The pouch tipped sideways. Something slipped free and struck the wooden table. Clink. The sound was small enough that anyone in the hallway would have missed it. Callahan did not. His hand stopped above the bench. A bronze challenge coin rested near Laura's fingertips, darkened with age, its surface worn smooth in places. One edge was flattened. Callahan forgot the county report. For a heartbeat, the fluorescent lights above him became hard white sunlight. The quiet courtroom air became dry heat. He heard rotor wash somewhere beyond sight, then the brittle hiss of radio static. A woman's voice cut through it, calm and close. Look at me, Lieutenant. The memory vanished. Callahan drew a slow breath. Laura had already picked up the coin. Wait. She stopped. Your Honor. He stared at the object between her fingers. May I see that? Laura's expression changed for the first time that morning. Not alarm. Curiosity. She placed the coin in Rachel Morgan's hand, and Rachel carried it the 12 feet to the bench. Callahan accepted it carefully. The metal was cool. The crust had faded from years of handling, but the damaged edge was unmistakable. His thumb moved across it. Another fragment surfaced. Dust moving across a temporary staging area. Canvas snapping in hot wind. A radio refusing to connect. Someone standing directly in front of him while everything else seemed confused and distant. One thing at a time. Callahan blinked. Rachel was still beside the bench, watching him. She had worked in his courtroom for 4 years and knew his habits well enough to recognize when something had broken his concentration. This had. Where did you get this? Callahan asked. Laura looked at the coin. During my service. Was it issued to you? No. Someone gave it to you? Laura nodded. A long time ago. Ethan Brooks shifted at the county table. Your Honor, I do not see how a challenge coin relates to the inspection record. Callahan turned the coin over. A date was faintly visible beneath the worn crest. His chest tightened. 2003. At the moment, Mr. Brooks, neither do I. He looked back at Laura. Did you carry this overseas? She hesitated. Yes, Your Honor. The answer opened another narrow passage in his memory. A departure window closing. Names on a manifest. A count that did not match. Callahan could almost see a younger woman's face, but every time he reached for it, dust seemed to move across the image. He returned the coin to Rachel. She carried it back to Laura, but her attention remained on the judge. Laura slipped the coin toward the velvet pouch, slower now. Is something wrong, Your Honor? Callahan looked at her. Brown hair. Controlled posture. Steady eyes. Nothing matched the young woman he was trying to remember, and yet everything did. I am not sure, he said. Laura placed the coin inside the pouch. The soft click of its clasp sounded strangely final. Callahan glanced at the date on the case file, then at Laura again. He no longer wondered whether he had heard her voice before. He wondered where. Callahan let the silence settle before he spoke again. The challenge coin was back inside Laura's folder, but its flattened edge remained sharp in his memory. He needed facts now, not impressions. Ms. Bennett, I am going to ask you 3 questions about your service. Laura studied him carefully. All right, Your Honor. Ethan Brooks rose halfway from his chair. Your Honor, I renew my concern about relevance. Callahan turned toward him. Noted, Mr. Brooks. I will keep this brief. Brooks sat down, though his expression made clear that he was counting every second. Callahan looked back at Laura. You served in the United States Army? Yes, Your Honor. Where were you stationed in 2003? Laura's eyes narrowed slightly. The question was no longer casual. She named the installation, and the words seemed to strike something solid inside Callahan. Heat returned to his memory. A row of temporary structures. Dust moving under a pale afternoon sky. Young soldiers checking manifests beside idling vehicles. He kept his face neutral. And, during that year, did you serve under the name Sergeant Laura Bennett? Laura did not answer immediately. Rachel Morgan stopped typing. Even Brooks seemed to sense that the proceeding had crossed an invisible line. Yes, Laura said at last. I did. Callahan felt his pulse change. Sergeant Bennett. The name had been buried beneath 2 decades of courtrooms, law books, elections, mortgages, birthdays, and ordinary mornings. Now it rose with startling clarity. Still, one piece was missing. The face. He remembered a voice. A presence. Someone who had made chaos feel orderly simply by refusing to become part of it. Laura shifted her folder half an inch. How do you know that, Your Honor? Callahan did not answer. Not yet. Brooks stood. Judge Callahan, I believe we need to address what is happening here. We will. Do you know Ms. Bennett personally? Callahan looked at Laura. I am trying to determine that. Brooks frowned. With respect, that seems like something the court should establish before continuing. This time Callahan nodded. You are correct. The concession surprised Brooks. Callahan removed his glasses and set them beside the case file. Ms. Bennett, I am not asking you to disclose anything classified, private, or unrelated to this matter. I need only one point clarified. Laura waited. During an overseas assignment in 2003, were you involved in an accountability problem during a personnel movement? The change in Laura was immediate but restrained. Her fingers stopped against the folder. Her eyes remained on Callahan, yet they seemed to be looking through him now, toward a place much farther away. There were several personnel movements, she said. This one happened late in the day, Callahan continued. A departure was delayed. Communications were unreliable. The head count did not match the manifest. Laura drew a slow breath. Rachel watched her. Brooks no longer reached for his files. Callahan felt the old scene assembling itself piece by piece. Someone was missing, he said. Laura's voice became quieter. That happened more than once. A lieutenant. Something flickered across her face. Callahan saw it. He had left the staging area to verify personnel locations. When he tried to return, the movement had shifted and his radio could not reach the team. Laura's composure finally developed a crack. Not fear. Recognition of the event, if not the man describing it. How do you know about that? Callahan leaned forward. The courtroom seemed impossibly still. Because someone noticed the count was wrong. Laura stared at him. Someone refused to assume the lieutenant had boarded another vehicle. Her hand slowly closed around the edge of the Navy folder. Callahan heard the remembered radio static again, clearer than before. He saw dust, sunlight, and a figure walking toward him through the haze. The face remained just beyond reach. "Were you that sergeant?" he asked. Laura's eyes widened. "How do you know that, Your Honor?" For a moment, Nathan Callahan did not answer. Laura's question remained between them, but his mind had already crossed 23 years. The fluorescent hum of courtroom 4C faded beneath another sound, the steady churn of engines at a temporary overseas staging site in 2003. He had been Lieutenant Nathan Callahan then, young enough to believe a complete manifest meant everyone was where the paper said they were. Late afternoon heat pressed against rows of canvas shelters and temporary offices. Dust moved across the packed ground in thin sheets. Vehicles waited near the departure point while soldiers checked equipment, names, and movement assignments. Sergeant Laura Bennett stood beside an operations table with a clipboard in one hand. She had already counted twice. "Do it again," she said. The specialist beside her checked the manifest. The number remained wrong. One person was missing. Callahan. Earlier, the lieutenant had left the staging area to verify the location of personnel whose movement assignment had changed. What should have taken several minutes stretched longer when teams relocated and radio traffic became unreliable. Back at the departure point, someone suggested Callahan had probably boarded another vehicle. Laura checked. He had not. Someone else assumed another team had accounted for him. Laura checked that too. They had not. "We are short one," she said. The departure window was narrowing, but Laura refused to turn an assumption into a fact. She reported the discrepancy, received authorization to assist with a personnel search, took a working radio, and followed Callahan's last confirmed route. Nearly a mile from the staging area, she found him beside an empty temporary checkpoint, trying to make sense of a radio that could hear traffic but could not reliably transmit. Callahan remembered seeing her approach through the dust. She did not rush toward him. She did not lecture him. She simply stopped several feet away and looked directly at him. "Lieutenant Callahan?" "Sergeant. You are accounted for now. Let us go." That was it. No speech. No drama. Just certainty. They walked back toward the staging area while Laura updated the search team over the radio. Callahan tried to explain what had happened. She listened for perhaps 30 seconds before saying, "Save it for the movement review. Right now, we get you back on the manifest." He remembered how embarrassed he had felt. Laura had never used that embarrassment against him. At the departure point, she verified his name herself before closing the count. Later, when the movement had settled and the afternoon heat began to fade, Callahan found her beside a stack of equipment. Cases. He held out a challenge coin he had carried since training. One edge had been flattened after years of writing beside his keys. "For coming back," he said. Laura looked at the coin, then at him. "I did not come back for you, Lieutenant." Callahan had not known how to answer. Laura turned the coin once between her fingers. "I came back because the count was wrong." He smiled despite himself. "That makes me feel important. Do not get carried away." For the first time, she smiled too. Then her expression became serious. "Remember this when you are responsible for people someday. A manifest is paper. Accountability is people." Callahan never forgot those words. The years carried him out of uniform, through law school, into courtrooms, and eventually behind a judge's bench, but that afternoon remained somewhere beneath everything that followed. Courtroom 4C returned around him. Laura Bennett stood exactly where she had been, one hand gripping the edge of her faded navy folder. Callahan looked at her face, and at last the woman in the dust and the woman before his bench became the same person. Callahan remained silent for several seconds, staring at Laura as if 23 years had suddenly collapsed into the distance between the bench and her table. Rachel Morgan watched him carefully. Ethan Brooks stood beside his files, no longer impatient, only confused. Laura was the first to speak. "Your Honor." Callahan slowly removed his glasses. The gesture seemed to strip away something formal with them. "Laura," he said, and the use of her first name made Brooks turn sharply toward the bench. Laura's expression tightened. Callahan leaned forward. His voice was quieter now. "You do not remember me?" Laura studied his face. She searched the gray at his temples, the lines around his eyes, the features altered by more than 2 decades. Nothing came immediately. Callahan almost smiled. "Lieutenant Nathan Callahan." Laura did not move. Temporary staging site. 2003. Bad radio. Worse sense of direction. Something changed in her eyes. The courtroom disappeared from her expression for a moment. She looked at him again, not as a judge, but as a man whose younger face was slowly emerging beneath the years. "Nathan." Callahan smiled. "Yes." Laura exhaled softly. "You became a judge." "Eventually." A faint smile touched her face. "That is quite a promotion." Rachel lowered her eyes, hiding her own smile. Brooks did not. His attention moved between them with growing concern. "Your Honor, I believe the county needs clarification." Callahan's smile disappeared. The judge returned. "You are correct, Mr. Brooks." He placed his glasses back on and straightened the file before him. "For the record, I have just recognized Ms. Bennett as someone I knew during my military service approximately 23 years ago. I had no knowledge that she was involved in this matter before today's hearing." Brooks nodded slowly. "Given that history, does the court intend to continue?" Laura spoke before Callahan answered. "I do not want special consideration." Her voice carried the same steadiness it had all morning. "What happened 23 years ago has nothing to do with these documents." Callahan looked at her, and for a moment he heard Sergeant Bennett again. "Facts first. Nothing else." "Agreed," he said. "Our prior connection is not evidence, and it will not determine the merits of this case." Laura nodded once. Brooks seemed relieved, but only briefly. Callahan opened the county file. "However, Mr. Brooks, before this connection became clear, Ms. Bennett raised a discrepancy that still requires an answer." Brooks glanced down. Callahan placed 2 documents side by side. The county notice states that the property remained out of compliance through April 18th. Correct. The contractor receipt shows the work was completed April 16th. The county has not conceded that the work satisfied the notice. "I understand." Callahan tapped the supplemental inspection report. "Then explain this handwritten notation." Brooks stepped closer. Rachel carried him a copy. He read the line once. His forehead tightened. The inspector had recorded that the required correction was observed before the date the county claimed the violation remained unresolved. Brooks turned a page, then another. "I would need to verify this with the inspection office." "You came here prepared to ask the court to rely on this file," Callahan said. "Did you verify it before today?" Brooks did not answer immediately. Laura stood quietly beside her folder. She did not look pleased. She did not need to. Callahan looked from the conflicting documents to Brooks. "Recognition does not change the evidence, Mr. Brooks." He paused. "But neither does confidence." The courtroom fell silent. 23 years earlier, Laura Bennett had found one missing person because she refused to accept an inaccurate count. Now, standing alone in a courtroom without an attorney, she had done the same thing again. She had found the one detail everyone else had been willing to overlook. Ethan Brooks kept his eyes on the handwritten notation, as though reading it a third time might change the date. It did not. The fluorescent lights hummed above him, and the confidence that had carried his arguments all morning began to thin. "Your Honor, I need to contact the inspection office before I can explain the discrepancy." Callahan folded his hands on the bench. "That would have been useful before asking this court to accept the county's timeline as established fact." Brooks lowered the report. "Yes, Your Honor." Laura remained still. She had spent the morning correcting dates, defending documents, and resisting the assumption that standing alone meant standing unprepared. Now that the county's own record supported her concern, she showed no satisfaction. Callahan noticed that too. "Miss Bennett," he said, "your legal assistance appointment is next Thursday?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And you are requesting sufficient time to attend that appointment before any further substantive proceeding?" "Yes." Callahan nodded, then looked toward Brooks. "The county will provide Ms. Bennett with a complete inspection file, including any photographs, supplemental notes, correspondence, and records used to establish the alleged compliance period." Brooks made a note. "Understood." Before the next hearing, the county will also verify the April 18th report and determine when the inspector actually observed the correction. "Yes, Your Honor." Callahan paused. The next words required more care. "There is another issue." Brooks looked up. So did Laura. "My prior connection to Ms. Bennett is now on the record. I did not recognize her when this hearing began, and she plainly did not recognize me. Nevertheless, the history is significant enough that I will not allow personal gratitude to become judicial advantage." Laura's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "That is what I want," she said. "I know." Callahan turned toward Rachel. "The clerk will document today's disclosure. Before further proceedings on the merits, the appropriate process for reassignment or any required review of my continued participation will be followed." Rachel nodded and began typing. Brooks closed one folder. "The county has no objection to a continuance." Callahan looked at him. "This is not merely about what the county objects to, Mr. Brooks. Ms. Bennett documented 4 attempts to obtain representation. Her legal assistance appointment is already scheduled. The record contains a material timeline question that your office cannot presently explain. Moving forward today would serve speed better than fairness." Brooks absorbed the words without protest. "Understood, Your Honor." Callahan looked at Laura. "The matter will be continued. You will receive the new date in writing after the procedural issue concerning reassignment is resolved." Laura nodded. "Thank you." "Do not thank me for that. You identified a discrepancy and supported it with documents. The court is responding to the record." Laura held his gaze for a moment. "Then thank you for reading it." Something about the answer settled over the room more heavily than any victory speech could have. Callahan glanced toward Brooks. "One more thing. Earlier, you suggested Miss Bennett's lack of counsel reflected a choice and treated her military background as though she were trying to use it for influence. The documents support neither assumption." Brooks' face tightened. "Yes, Your Honor. Procedure matters. So does accuracy." Callahan closed the county file. "Do not confuse a person standing alone with a person who has nothing behind her." Brooks gave a restrained nod. Laura gathered her papers, returning each one to its proper place. The challenge coin remained hidden inside the velvet pouch. No medal appeared. No rank was announced. No old favor decided the case. The only thing that had changed was that everyone in the room was finally looking at the same facts. Rachel prepared the written notice, while Laura closed the faded navy folder. 23 years earlier, she had refused to let a departure schedule turn an inaccurate count into an acceptable one. Now another system had nearly moved forward because its paperwork looked official enough to discourage questions. Laura had done exactly what she had done then. She had checked the record, found what was missing, and quietly refused to move on until someone else saw it too. The hearing ended without applause, celebration, or any dramatic declaration. It ended the way Laura Bennett preferred most things to end, with the facts finally in the right place. Rachel Morgan handed her the written notice and confirmed that the legal assistance appointment remained scheduled for Thursday. Laura thanked her, tucked the paper into the faded navy folder, and stepped into the courthouse hallway. Late morning sunlight streamed through tall windows, laying bright rectangles across the polished floor. She had nearly reached the elevators when a familiar voice called from behind her. "Sergeant Bennett." Laura stopped. Nathan Callahan approached without his judicial robe, carrying it folded over one arm. Without the bench between them, he looked less like Judge Callahan and more like the young lieutenant she was slowly remembering. "Nathan," she said. He smiled. "That sounds strange after hearing Your Honor all morning." You chose the profession. Apparently, I make questionable decisions. Laura almost smiled. For several seconds, they simply stood there while courthouse doors opened and closed around them. 23 years had changed both of them, but the silence between them felt unexpectedly easy. Nathan glanced toward her folder. You really kept that coin all this time? Laura looked down. It stayed with my army things. I suppose I got used to carrying it. I thought you might have thrown it in a drawer and forgotten it. I did forget who gave it to me. Nathan laughed softly. That sounds about right. His expression then grew serious. I never forgot who I gave it to. Laura looked at him. Nathan, you made it back. That was the important part. You walked nearly a mile through that heat because a number on a manifest was wrong. I had authorization to help with the search. You always did know how to ruin a good story with accuracy. This time Laura smiled. Nathan looked toward the windows. I thought about that day more than you would expect. Why? He took a moment before answering. Because I learned what it feels like to become a missing detail inside a system. Everyone thought somebody else had accounted for me. The paperwork was almost right. The count was almost right. You were the person who decided almost was not enough. Laura's expression became thoughtful. That was the job. Maybe. Nathan looked back at her. But I carried the lesson into law school. Then into court. Every case number represents a person. Every file can contain something everyone assumes somebody else checked. He paused. Somewhere along the way, I started forgetting where I learned that. Laura tightened her grip on the folder. You remember today. Because you walked into my courtroom. The elevator bell sounded. Its doors opened several yards away. Laura took one step toward it, then stopped. Do not let what happened today become a debt, Nathan. It is not. Good. Debts are supposed to be repaid. His voice softened. Some lessons are supposed to be carried. Laura held his gaze. Then she nodded. Carry it well. She entered the elevator and turned as the doors began to close. Nathan remained in the hallway beneath the quiet courthouse lights, his robe over one arm, watching the woman who had once refused to leave until every person was accounted for. Laura gave him the smallest nod. He returned it. Then the doors closed. Some people change lives without ever realizing they have done anything extraordinary. They remember a checklist, a responsibility, a job that needed to be finished. But the people they refuse to overlook remember something else. They remember the moment someone looked at an incomplete count, an incomplete record, or an incomplete truth and quietly said that almost right would never be right enough.